Welcome to Anews. I'm Umar Taslim, and you're watching Turkey's Diplomacy. Today on the program, Anews editor Mustafa Kocakanar and Dr. Abdunur Tumi will be joining me to discuss the top stories from Turkey and Africa. We'll also shed light on the latest global developments. But before we begin our discussions, let's take a look at this news report.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan welcomed Pakistani Prime Minister Shahbaz Shariff in Ankara on Tuesday. Discussions focused on enhancing cooperation in key sectors including trade, defense, investment, and energy.
Karşılıklı yatırımların teşvik edilmesi ve Pakistan'da şirketlerimize serbest ekonomik bölge tahsis edilmesi hususlarını görüştük. Askeri ve savunma sanayi alanındaki ilişkilerimizi ortak projelerle daha da geliştirme arzusundayız.
The Turkish president also expressed appreciation for Pakistan's consistent and principled stance on the Palestinian cause.
Pakistan'la hemen her konuda tam bir uyum içinde hareket ettiğimizi görmekten memnuniyet duyuyoruz. Bu vesileyle Pakistan'ın Filistin meselesindeki kararlı duruşunu her zaman takdir ettiğimizi bir kez daha ifade etmek istiyorum.
Your political struggle, spanning over several decades, has transformed Turkey into a robust and a very strong economy, a progressive society, and a nation of enormous diplomatic influence on the global stage.
The Pakistani premier's visit is seen as a reflection of the historical friendship and strategic partnership between Turkey and Pakistan, underpinned by shared values and mutual trust.
1967 sınırları temelinde başkenti Doğu Kudüs olan coğrafi bütünlüğe sahip, bağımsız ve egemen Filistin devleti tesisi yolunda birlikte çalışmaya devam edeceğiz.
This would be the only just, comprehensive, fair and lasting solution to the Palestinian question in accordance with the UN and OIC resolutions.
Welcome back to the program. Anews editor Mustafa Kocakanar, welcome to the program as well.
Thanks for hosting me, Omar.
Mustafa, today let's start with April 23rd, National Sovereignty and Children's Day. Tell me about this special day. You know, this is a day which came into existence because of Atatürk. And today, the day is focusing especially on children, and it's showing the world that children are the future of Turkey. We should give them responsibilities. We should allow them to explore the world. Tell me more about this day, Mustafa. Tell me about the importance of today.
Today, the Turkish nation is proudly marking the 105th anniversary of the foundation of the Grand National Assembly of Turkey. And in 1920, the Grand National Assembly of Turkey was inaugurated with the principle that the sovereignty belongs to the nation. And after that, the parliament, which proclaimed Turkey's and Turkish nation's independence and sovereignty of the national will to the entire world, let the countries and nations struggle for independence and future. And today, Turkish nation is remembering with grace and gratitude Gazi Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the commander-in-chief of Turkey's independence war, and the first speaker of the Grand National Assembly of Turkey, and the first president of the new Turkish Republic, and all martyrs. And on this occasion, I wish Allah's mercy upon on all Turkey's martyrs, those who sacrifice their lives for the independence of the Turkish nation and the independence of the Republic of Turkey.
Indeed, Mustafa, a very unique day today. And this is the only national holiday in the world that is dedicated to children. A very important moment in Turkish history. Now let's get back to the main agenda of today's show, Mustafa. The Pakistani Prime Minister, Shahbaz Sharif, he was in Ankara yesterday. He met Turkish President Erdoğan. They discussed trade, they discussed ties, bilateral trade, multiple other issues, for example, the Cyprus issue, the Kashmir issue. Tell me more about this visit, Mustafa.
Umar, as we know, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan yesterday welcomed Pakistani Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif in the capital of Ankara to discuss all aspects of bilateral political, economic, cultural and military relationships between Turkey and Pakistan. They also exchanged views on the latest regional developments in the Middle East and Asia Pacific, as well as global geopolitical challenges. And following their bilateral meeting, both Erdoğan and Shahbaz Sharif held a joint press conference. And at this important press conference, they reiterated their country's determination to enhance bilateral relationships in all fields. As you know, economy and defense are two important pillars defining the bilateral relationships between Ankara and Islamabad. Within this context, I think in the coming future, we will see further cooperation between Turkey and Pakistan in terms of addressing regional and global security challenges. Erdoğan also reiterated Turkey's strong support for Pakistan's territorial integrity, political sovereignty and fight against terrorism. Erdoğan said that Pakistan can rely on Turkey on every field to resolve its political or economic problems. In exchange, Pakistani Prime Minister also reiterated his country's strong support for Turkey's political stability and economic prosperity. Within this context, I think the strengthening relationships between Turkey and Pakistan will not only yield positive results in terms of bilateral relationships between two brotherly countries, but also yield positive results for the regional and global security and tranquility.
Mustafa, let's talk about terrorism. Erdoğan praised Pakistani Prime Minister for his efforts for Palestinians who have been under a complete siege by Israeli forces. And when we talk about terrorism, Pakistan has also been facing terrorism with the BLA. They have conducted multiple terror attacks in the last few weeks. Turkey has been fighting terrorism against the PKK, YPG, and Daesh as well. So there are multiple aspects that join that you can relate to both countries. Now, let's talk about the Kashmir issue. There was a terror attack in the Indian-occupied Kashmir as well yesterday. Multiple people were killed, and the United States issued a message that the Trump administration is going to continue supporting the Indian government. Now, do you think that the United States is supporting India because China is on Pakistan's side? Obviously, Pakistan has also been facing terrorism. So how do you analyze these statements from the American president, and what do you think the future could be like when we're talking about the Kashmir issue?
Omar, both Turkey and Pakistan have been suffering from issues related to terrorism. And within this context, both Turkish and Pakistani decision makers have been always reiterating and reaffirming their strong support for coping with the terrorism issue. Within this context, as you know, there are some problems between India and Pakistan over the territorial issues in the Kashmir region. Turkey is supporting Pakistan's position on occupied Kashmir problem. On the other hand, United States right now desperately needs India to counter rising China in the Asia-Pacific region. Within this context, as you know, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance this week paid an official visit to India to meet with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and he reiterated, reaffirming United States' strong support for India's position in the Kashmir region. I think India and Pakistan will be continuing at odds over Kashmir issue because it is too complex issue to deal with in near future. Turkey is always calling for diplomacy and dialogue between India and Pakistan to resolve their bilateral disputes over Kashmir region. On the other hand, Turkey is still continuing to reaffirm its support for Pakistan's territorial integrity and political sovereignty. I think all stakeholders should come and sit at the negotiations table to resolve their bilateral disputes. Turkey can be, I think, a facilitator between India and Pakistan to resolve their disputes. I think both Indian and Pakistani decision makers can rely on Turkey's important role in terms of facilitating or mediating talks between two conflicting sides to resolve their disputes. I think in the near future we will see Turkey's more involvement in the Asia-Pacific region to bring long-lasting peace and stability to the region.
Mustafa, tell me about the Cyprus issue, because the Pakistani PM, he yesterday voiced support for the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. And we saw earlier in this month when Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan voiced support for the Southern Cypriots. So how are you looking at that situation? And tell me about this triple alliance between Azerbaijan, Turkey and Pakistan. Erdoğan had said that if all of these countries come together, a lot can be achieved. So tell me, how is Pakistan looking at the Cyprus island issue? And tell me more about the triple alliance between these three countries.
Omar, as we know, in 1974, Turkish military forces launched Cyprus liberation operation to rescue and liberate Turkish Cypriots from the atrocities committed by the Greek Cypriots. And after that process, the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus was established. Currently, Turkey is the only country recognizing the independence of the Turkish Cypriots on the island. And Turkey is always engaging with other nations to increase awareness about the legitimate rights of Turkish Cypriots living on the island. But so far, unfortunately, no country recognizes the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus as a state. Turkey is always increasing its dialogue and diplomacy with brotherly countries to convince them to recognize the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Within this context, yesterday, Pakistani Prime Minister Shahbaz Shariff mentioned about Cyprus issue. He signals that Pakistan can improve its relationships with the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. On the other hand, Azerbaijan is also reiterating its strong support for the legitimate rights of Turkish Cypriots on the Cyprus island. I think these three countries should cooperate deeply to increase international awareness about the geopolitical situation in the Eastern Mediterranean. As you also know, Turkey and Azerbaijan have been enjoying close relationships in all fields. We can describe bilateral relationships with Ankara and Baku with the motto of one nation, two states. These countries are also increasing their cooperation a bit with Pakistan in the defense fields. I think collaboration and cooperation among these important brotherly countries will increase peace and stability not only in the region but also in the global context.
Mustafa, thanks for elaborating on the latest developments. Now we're going to take a look at Hakan Fidan's visit to Algeria, where the Turkish foreign minister inaugurated a new consulate in the coastal city of Oran.
Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan held important meetings with Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune and his Algerian counterpart Ahmed Attif on the sidelines of the Turkey-Algeria Joint Planning Group in Algiers on Monday. The meetings underscored the growing diplomatic and strategic ties between Turkey and Algeria, paving the way for enhanced cooperation in various sectors.
The most important bond between our countries, as demonstrated by our leaders, is mutual trust. We trust Algeria in every respect. Our country will always be a reliable friend for Algeria.
Both sides agreed to explore joint projects in the defense and energy sectors, with a clear intention to deepen their strategic partnership in the future.
Algeria is also one of our important partners in terms of energy security. We want to further strengthen our relations in this area. Likewise, we will continue our cooperation in the field of defense industry. We believe that we can undertake joint projects in these areas.
The Turkish foreign minister also underscored the importance of continued cooperation in addressing global humanitarian concerns, particularly regarding Gaza.
Our most important agenda at the moment is the delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza and the establishment of a ceasefire. We will continue to support our brotherly Palestinian people in the strongest way. I would like to thank our Algerian brothers and sisters once again for supporting the Palestinian cause. We will further strengthen our cooperation in this regard.
Welcome back to the program. Now we're being joined by Dr. Abdunnoor Toumi, who is a political analyst and a senior advisor at the Middle East and Africa Institute based in Paris. Dr. Toumi, welcome to the program.
Good morning, and thank you for having me on the show, and happy National Sovereignty and Children's Day.
Thank you, Dr. Toumi. Dr. Toumi, as we were watching, the Turkish foreign minister was in Algeria on Sunday, where a new consulate was inaugurated. Please tell us more about these developing ties. How can Turkey and Algeria play a more important role in a region which has been facing many problems over the past few years?
Actually, I mean, the both countries, I mean, because of their size and positions in the Mediterranean, one on the east and the other on the west, and also going through all the historic relations between the two nations and people, and that have many ties. They are linked together. And following the ongoing turmoil and unprecedented situation in geopolitics in the last 3 or 4 decades, that in fact, I mean, the region, the Mediterranean, is boiling, and as we all know, I mean, the Mediterranean, it's not just a sea. I mean, it has the history and all the, it is, again, affected, and any geopolitics, geoeconomic, strategic elements will impact the region and its people. So then now the relation between Algeria and Turkey, I mean, have been going and reach a high level, first of all, of trust between the two, I mean, the leaders in those two countries. And this was actually the process of the 2006 that Friendship and Cooperation Agreement. Then Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, when he visited Algeria, actually he set the tone and had also a good response and sincere response from Algerian leaders at that time. And now, in the light of the election of Abdelmajid Tebboune in 2019, and actually he personally knows well Turkey's politics and economics, and he dealt with Turkey leaders at that time when he was housing minister. And then later, he actually set a new paradigm in Algerian foreign policy doctrine that will have this diversification pattern, in which gives Algeria's actually kind of free movement to deal strongly and neck to neck with regional and superpowers. On this stance with Algeria, actually, and that was enhanced, in fact, in 2022 in the President Abdülmecit Tebboune to Turkey. It was actually, had a solid, actually set the solid beginning of trust again and moving forward between the two nations in terms of strengthening a strategic partnership regarding both countries on bilateral level, national interests, but also has, this strategic partnership has a direct impact on the ongoing turmoil that is taking place in the region and the sub-region, and notably on the Libyan dossier. So this is, again, the last visit of Mr. Hakan to Turkey, and which is another element here that shows how Turkey is looking at Algeria as a serious partner, and also the role of Algeria in Turkey's Africa's politics, actually not only in North Africa, but also in the Sahel and Sub-Saharan politics, by going and opening this new consulate in Oran, in western city of Algeria. And this also shows how these two countries, actually people's interactions are increasing.
Mustafa, I want to ask you about the Turkish perspective of this visit. Tell me about the Turkish view, how the Turkish government is trying to enhance its ties. There are many different aspects when we talk about Turkey and Algeria. There are cultural ties, there are bilateral ties, defense ties, people exchanges. How is the Turkish government viewing its activities, not just in North Africa, but in the entire continent?
Umar, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan paid an official visit to Algeria this week to strengthen bilateral cooperation between Turkey and Algeria. Within this context, he met with the Algerian president and his Algerian counterpart to exchange views on all aspects of bilateral relationships between Ankara and Algiers. And following his meetings with the Algerian leaders, Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan briefed the journalists about his meeting with them. He reiterated Turkey's strong support for Algeria's political sovereignty and stability. Within this context, Turkey and Algeria right now are trying to expand their bilateral trade volume to $10 billion. They also pledged their determination to increase bilateral cooperation in several fields, particularly defense and energy. I think bilateral relationships between Turkey and Algeria in the defense and energy fields will be defining points to describe strategic partnerships between two brotherly countries. I think the Algerian president will visit Turkey to participate in the high-level strategic cooperation meeting this year. I think President Erdoğan will welcome him. I think they will finalize the new agreements, and they will sign new agreements, dozens of agreements maybe, I don't know, to strengthen bilateral relationships between Turkey and Algeria. On the other hand, Turkey is considering Algeria as one of the most important geopolitical actors in the North Africa in terms of bringing solutions to the problems. As you know, Turkey is always reiterating its motto of regional solutions for regional problems. Turkey is also increasing its bilateral cooperation with Libya in the region. I think the strengthening of cooperation and collaboration between Turkey and North Africa will yield positive results in terms of ensuring long-lasting peace and stability in the region. To sum up, I can say that Turkey is not looking at North Africa from the perspective of imperialism or colonialism. Turkey is always in favor of win-win situation for all regional stakeholders. Based on this geopolitical approach, I think Turkey will take further steps to enhance and strengthen its bilateral or multilateral relationships with all stakeholders in the North Africa.
Dr. Toumi, I would like to return back to you. Like Mustafa mentioned, that Algeria is one of the most important geopolitical actors in the region. And now Turkey and Algeria have both been staunch supporters of the Palestinian cause. How can both of these countries join forces and bring international pressure on the West and in international institutions? What actions can they take in the UN and also bilateral actions to increase that support for the Palestinian nation?
Actually, both countries, have shown their unconditional support to the Palestinian cause, and also actually not only the leaders, but also the people, who feel that, it's a legitimate cause and they are not going to be shying away from it. So now, Algeria is playing a major role at the UN Security Council as a non-permanent member, and has been actually a vocal voice for the Palestinians and on the carnage that is taking place or has been taking place in the last year and a half. So, and actually, as I said, both countries are actually pivotal countries and have a say, and they can actually position themselves in this posture. Not to mediate, actually to just express and show their strength by having these actually good relationships actually on the bilateral level actually for each country, like Turkey, Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and even lately the rapprochement with Egypt, so that Algeria has excellent relations with Qatar, who is playing a major role as a mediator in this unjust, again, carnage that has been taking place on Gazan people. And by the way, it's not only in Gaza, but on the entire occupied Palestine. And we saw how the messianic, racist government policies in the West Bank. So Turkey and Algeria, both countries, they can have also actually, again, to move, actually, to be aggressive on this matter at the Islamic conference, and also to, again, they have many leverage they can use, and for instance, again, position themselves and speak directly to those partners, actually Saudi Arabia and Emirates and Qatar, and actually even European countries, like for instance, France, Germany, even though Algeria-France relations are not in a good, it's not a good time, but for instance, Algeria and Italy can have that leverage, and so to bring all this together. But the question, it's not about Algeria or Turkey or Saudi Arabia or Qatar. It's all about how, again, the international community stays as one and says enough is enough to the, again, impunity of this messianic government that has been, again, massacring the Palestinian people in the last year and a half.
Dr. Toumi, we've discussed good relations. Now let's talk about the relations which are not so good. And I'm talking about Algeria and France, the tensions that have been increasing over the last few weeks. Now, tit-for-tat measures have been taken between both countries. Diplomats and officials have been expelled. What is the latest development between these two countries? Why is there so much tension?
As you know, the relations between Algeria and France, they have, never been normal. And this is because of the history, and that goes to the harsh occupation and acculturation process that led to actually a war of liberation that Algeria actually imposed its independence actually in 1962. And then, so there were these relations, actually, I would like, let's put it in this way. It was like in hate and love relations. This is, again, because of history, I mean, demography, geography, and also the interactions between the people. I mean, we have more than 2 million Algerians who live in France, and around like 800,000 Algerian residents, permanent residents in France. But what's going on lately is there is this, actually, as you know now, President Emmanuel Macron, he is lame duck president. I mean, following the political crisis that France has been going through since he dissolved the lower chamber last summer. And from then, actually, he provoked actually this political crisis provoked a constitutional crisis. I mean, because France has a presidential system who went from lame duck president to a hanging parliament. So therefore, this political crisis actually has kind of marginalized the role of the president. As a result, so the far-right media, politicians, and elite, actually now they found this kind of selling point to actually chew on, and is Algeria. And Algeria is always has changed since since the election of President Abdelmadjid Tebboune in 2019. I mean, as I said, he did have a new foreign policy doctrine based on diversification partners. So France, I mean, this did kind of is challenging the interest or the special treatment that France has been enjoying for the last 5 decades or so. And now there is this fight, I would say, between an ideologue, actually interestingly enough, he is not the foreign minister, is not the president, he is the interior minister, actually, who is trying to, again, make this crisis, or using this crisis for his political aim, because he is running to lead the Republican Party next month, and will give him an opportunity to run for the presidential election here in France in 2027. So all these elements are related to domestic politics here in France. And of course, we know, I mean, domestic politics always has an impact on foreign policy. So this, again, crisis is between an ideologue who doesn't have actually strategic vision for a new Algeria, that Algeria actually leaders have a policy, a vision in the region, and how to, and the sub-region, and how to deal with the, those regional and superpowers. So especially with France. Nonetheless, Algeria-France relations, have close ties, and this brings us to the, I would say, the thorny issue of the migrants. And Algeria can help great deal France in terms of its migrant crisis, and it's not only in France, but it's also in Italy. And we saw how Giorgia Meloni, is smartly dealing with this issue with the Maghreb countries, and notably with Algeria, Libya, even though there is this political impasse in Libya, but the Libyans are doing their best to help also, and Tunisia. But whereas France, actually the interior minister, he took this issue and bring it to fight with the Algerian over, I would say, sub-questions that not are strategic. The argument of this interior minister is just about the writer who wrote, actually, who bashed Algeria and who is now in Algeria, actually jailed in Algeria. But this is, the Algerian authorities are dealing with this from the justice perspective and not from the politician or political perspective. Whereas France has used this tool and are kind of making these obstacles to President Macron, who is showing actually who wants to break through this crisis and move forward dealing with Algeria. I mean, as he put it, actually he went in a state visit 2 years ago, and he launched a new perspective dealing with the new Algeria. That I think there is this misconception between the French diplomat in the Quai d'Orsay, which is foreign ministry, and the far right and the media and politicians who are going with this kind of action. By the way, it's a PR campaign for Algeria bashing, 50 years for kind, and also there is this kind of element that the far right in France, that they belong, actually not the youth, but the elderly, they belong to what used to be called the French Algeria. I mean, there is this French Algeria nostalgic in which which is a complex that Algeria did, and the French, quote unquote, let's say, power in Africa.
Dr. Abdunur Toumi, thank you for being on the program and thank you for your analysis.
Thank you.
Mustafa, we have, I guess, 5 minutes, but my final question is for you. Tell me how Western dominance is slowly being erased in Africa. Which sort of countries are these countries? For example, Algeria, Tunisia, we know colonialism existed in Africa. All these countries were occupied by these European powers. Now, since that effect is slowly going away, which countries are these African countries moving towards? Do you believe it's China?
Umar, as we know, some African countries are right now urging France to withdraw its troops from the continent. And Turkey is always seeking to improve its bilateral or multilateral relationships with all countries. Within this context, Burkina Faso and Mali and other African nations are trying to expand Turkey to enhance their cooperation with Ankara to bring long-lasting peace and stability to the continent. On the other hand, as you know, China is in Africa, and China can be described as one of the most important geopolitical actors in the region right now. But on the other hand, Russia is also improving its relationships with other African nations. I think some international global actors, particularly China and Russia, think that they can fulfill the so-called geopolitical vacuum in the region. But I think that all international stakeholders should look at Africa from the perspective of win-win situation. If they want to revive the colonial era or imperialism in the region, it will not yield positive results for peace and tranquility in the Africa continent. And Turkey is looking at the situation from the win-win perspective. Turkish decision makers are regularly paying official visits to African countries to listen to their problems, and they are struggling. They are seeking to find solutions to the problems in the region. Turkey is also inviting African leaders to Turkey to participate in international organizations to increase awareness about Africa on the global stage. I think China and Russia will be supposed to play an important role in the region for establishing long-lasting stability in the continent. I think stakeholders, regional or international stakeholders, will follow Turkey's balanced approach to the region if they want to ensure and uphold peace and security in the Africa continent.
Anews editor Mustafa Kojakanar, thank you for being on the program. Thank you for your analysis as well.
You are welcome, Omar.
That brings us to the end of today's program. From Turkey to Africa and beyond, we'll continue to follow the stories that shape our world and matter most. Until next time, stay informed and stay safe.